that we would like to begin today by acknowledging that the work we do takes place on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, this territory is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Our regional hubs and partners across Canada similarly gather on the traditional territory of many of Canada's Indigenous nations who have cared for these lands since time immemorial. Ryerson University, the Conference Board of Canada, and Blueprint, backed by federal funding, launched the Future Skills Centre 18 months ago with a three-tiered mandate to anticipate how skills are changing, to partner with the skills development ecosystem to test and evaluate new approaches that prepare Canadians for the future, and to build networks and platforms that actively engage and share what we are learning. Our research strategy is an essential pillar of our work, driven by our consortia partners at Diversity Institute, at Ryerson University, and the Conference Board of Canada. And the report we are launching today is the next installment of the Skills Next research series, published in partnership with the Diversity Institute, Future Skills, and the Public Policy Forum. Skills Next has already published a wealth of reports on a wide variety of key themes related to future skills, from labor market information to the role of technology and disruption in the labor market, how various countries are adapting, a focus, of course, on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if future skills is your interest, then Skills Next should be on your reading list. And I invite you to visit the Diversity Institute or the Future Skills website for links to the growing volume of reports. So on to today and why this conversation about competencies and skills framework is so important. I don't need to remind us about the scale of accelerating change, especially now in the context of this pandemic. On the one hand, we have to be attuned to how pressures on employers are and will continue to change, and therefore how we better define and anticipate the skills required by our workforce to meet those emerging challenges and opportunities. At the same time, barriers to diverse populations have been amplified. If skills are the new currency of the 21st century, we need to clarify the terms of exchange. And getting on the same page about how we understand and define skills is critical if we are going to better align and reduce friction between the needs of employers, the employment prospects of Canadians, and the role of skills development as a bridge between the two. So today we will hear from the Office of Literacy and Essential Skills at ESDC about the evolution of essential skills. And then we'll hear from the report authors sharing highlights from the research findings, followed by a panel discussion. It's now my pleasure to introduce Annette Vermaeten, Director of the Office of Literacy and Essential Skills at ESDC, to speak a bit more about the evolution of essential skills. Annette, welcome. Please join us.
Miigwech. Bonjour tout le monde. Je suis très heureuse d'être ici avec vous. It's very exciting to be here today to talk about this very important conversation. I wanted to take the opportunity to really thank you for being here, and so I will provide a very brief overview of where we're at in terms of the essential skills, and I certainly don't want to take any of the thunder away from the findings of the report. So I will be speaking at a very high level, but I'm very interested and excited to make the alignment with the work that's happening on the competency framework and the work that we're doing. So if we could go to the next slide. Okay, so so within the Government of Canada, we have had an essential skills framework for the over 25 years that was based on a lot of research that ESDC did, and in terms of the skills that are needed for Canadians in order to succeed. And so we've been using this framework for a number of years, and over the past year and a half, we've been working on renewing that framework. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about some of our early thoughts and where we're thinking that we're heading. I will say from the outset that this process is still in the final stages of approval. So I'm at this point won't be able to talk to you specifically about the framework and the next steps, but I will provide you some insights into the thinking behind it. So maybe if we can go on to the next slide. So the labor market. So as we know, the labor market has been over the last decade, especially, and the last few years, there have been rapid changes in the labor market, and these have become exacerbated more over the last year or 6 months due to the pandemic. So we're really starting to see that the skills that all Canadians need is shifting. So, for example, we know that today almost half of workers have numeracy and literacy skills below level 2, which means that they do not have the literacy and numeracy skills needed to function in a knowledge-based economy. And we also know that employers are looking for different kinds of skills. So not only are they putting more of an emphasis on the need for foundational skills such as literacy and numeracy, they're also looking for other skills, which we're really excited to be part of our conversation today. And this is around what we call, we in ESDC are calling the social emotional skills and also transferable skills. And these are the skills that we all need. We need them to adapt to different situations. We need them to learn other skills, etc. And so, for example, what employers are saying is that almost 70% of them are looking for these soft skills, compared to about half who are mostly looking for the technical skills. This is sending a really strong signal in terms of the emphasis that we want to be placing on the need for individuals to be focusing in on social emotional skills. And we also know that it's challenging for employers to be able to invest in employee skills. And so Canada is somewhat behind other countries in terms of the investments that they put on skills training overall, with a lot of the emphasis on skills training being focused on very high skilled individuals within the workforce, or within individuals who are further away from the labor market. Next slide, please. So within ESDC, the Office of Literacy and Essential Skills has been learning a lot over the years in terms of literacy and skills in general, and what it means for individuals and what it means for employers. So some of the things that we've been doing have been in collaboration with some of the people that are here today, for instance, with SRDC, as well as DataAngel, Scott Murray, and a number of other individuals who are participants here today. So one of the projects, a very instrumental project that we did, a demonstration project, demonstrated 23% return on investment in terms of impacts for employers in investing in essential skills. We also know that there's a correlation between literacy and impacts on GDP and productivity. So, you know, even if this 1% increase in literacy level is associated with even a slight increase in GDP or labor market, we know that any impact on this is very important for today's economy. We've also learned a lot. We've learned how adults learn new skills. We've learned, for example, that adults learn much better while they're on the job and while they're learning practical ways to advance their essential skills. We know that very targeted training can lead to big increases in employees' abilities and also in job productivity. So even 20 hours of training can have a really big impact. And we also know that formal education doesn't always give us the skills that we need in order to meet the needs of what employers are looking for. So it's not necessarily what you learn, for example, in the Post-Secondary Education Institute is what's needed by employers. It's what you learn elsewhere. It's what you learn in terms of your social emotional skills, your soft skills in terms of really being able to be productive and contribute within the workforce. Next slide, please. Again, without stealing the thunder of the report, within ESDC, we're very confident that we're on the same page in terms of the findings of the competency frameworks in Canada's Essential Skills Report. And where they say that a lot more work needs to be done in a number of areas. So for example, measuring social emotional skills and the impacts that these have. So we know that, that they're important, and we anticipate that this will be a very important part in terms of a renewed essential skills framework. We also know that more work needs to be done to understand them, to measure them, to understand how to teach them. And so it's going to be a real opportunity, I think, for stakeholders across the country to come together and to really build the knowledge that's needed to put everything in place. Next slide, please. So social emotional skills, the importance of them. So we know that these skills are important in a number of different ways, and that they're important in terms of how we interact with each other, how we collaborate, how we adapt to different situations. And we know that they're not mutually exclusive. So, for example, to be able to collaborate with different groups and different cultures, etc., also really touches on other skills, such as your ability to adapt to new situations, your ability to be able to work together with others to come up with a solution to tough problems. So there's not a real consensus on what these social emotional skills are, but we and I think this will be brought up later. But I think there's a broad recognition of the need for these, and landing on the nomenclature will continue to be a challenge, although a lot of progress has been made over the last few years in coming closer to this. So this is one of the ongoing challenges in terms of being able to really really land on the nomenclature for this, but also to really be able to come together and develop the tools and resources that others need. And so these skills are important for not just work. They're important in terms of all our different life contexts and the way that we learn in terms of continuous learning, etc. So building on this is going to be really important going forward. Next slide, please. A lot of the work that we've been doing has drawn on the Government of Canada Advisory Council, as well as a number of other different studies, a number of other jurisdictions around the world who have been putting more and more of an emphasis on these social emotional skills. And so really, like here, you just see a few quotes from the Advisory Council on Economic Growth, but they really speak to the challenge that we have ahead of us. So we need to really focus on these skills. They're not easy skills. They're actually very, very difficult skills, and making them resonate with others and finding ways to really penetrate these skills into the skills training that we do is going to be very important going forward. Next slide, please. So the renewed essential skills that we're working on is going to be important from a number of different perspectives. So one thing is that I think it will provide some kind of a guidance for workers to have focus on what kind of skills they should be working on. So to really target the right skills and recognize at a minimum what they need to do and how they can improve those skills. We're also really excited in terms of the vulnerable groups or underrepresented groups, and finding different ways has been really critical in the work that we've been doing to ensure that the skills that we're identifying are done in such a way that they're inclusive to various different populations, and so that they resonate in various different ways. So in terms of some of the new skills that we're thinking about, collaboration, for example, and adaptability. What does that mean in Canada's diverse workforce and population? And we're also really interested in terms of digital skills, having an increased emphasis on digital skills. As we know, these are the skills that we need 24/7 now in terms of everything that we do within our work, within our personal lives, etc. So ensuring that all individuals have a basic level of digital skills and are actually able to grow and enhance these for a number from a number of different perspectives is going to be really critical. Next slide, please. I touched on this already previously, but return on investment. So we've done our homework, and we see that essential skills are very critical in terms of return on investment. This slide focuses more on the employer, but we have studies from the in terms of return on investment for society, return on investment for individuals, etc., that really emphasize this. So I already mentioned the 23% return on investment, the excellent demonstration project that SRDC led. But there are other studies out there that have been done. One that we've drawn heavily from is some work that was done with the Canada Goose Company, and in terms of the retention of individuals in terms of being hired after they went through some very employer demand-led training, and which led to more than 80% of those individuals being hired and continuing to work with the Canada Goose Company. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the renewed essential skills approach that we're working on, there were some very high level principles that we looked at in terms of what we wanted it to do. So as I mentioned, one important piece was about being adaptable and flexible. So we wanted to ensure that it's able to be pivoted to various different groups, whether these individuals are low-skilled individuals or high-skilled individuals, or adaptable within various racialized populations, or with Indigenous groups, or people with disabilities. So it's something that could really resonate with those groups and use as a basis and be adapted to the circumstances within which the training would take place. And so building on that, we really wanted to make sure that it resonates within a diverse population groups such as gender, disability, sexual orientation, culture, etc. And so we have done some important thinking about this, and we've had engagement sessions across the country over the last year to really do a signal check on whether this resonates in terms of these kinds of diversity issues and adaptability issues. And we've heard very, very, very positive signals from others that it's working. And the other important piece is that we really wanted to empower empower individuals specifically in terms of being able to manage and understand the skills that they have, and be able to work towards enhancing those skills. So that's something that we're really trying to figure out how we can do that moving forward. And so just to wrap this up, in terms of the engagement, as I mentioned, we did a number of engagement sessions across the country. We had, within the work that we were doing, an advisory group led by a number of experts across the country, some of whom are listed here on this slide. We also had engagement sessions with many people across the country on various different themes, such as diversity, vulnerable populations, understanding the types of training and tools that may be required, better understanding employer needs, etc. So this is a snapshot of some of the organizations who have been involved in the process along the way from various different perspectives. And the path forward. So as I mentioned, we're in a process right now of finalizing the work that we're doing. So we hope to be able to get back to you soon on next steps and on how we will be launching a renewed framework. And so really excited about that. And I'm sure that once we have more information to share with you, we'll be reaching out to others and working with you as we go forward. So thank you, Pedro, again, for the warm welcome. And I'll turn it over to you now for the next speaker.
Thank you, Annette. Really exciting work, and done with a number of partners. Really looking forward to the next steps on this. Thank you for your insights. I should also mention and give a shout out to our partners at the Conference Board of Canada that have done tremendous work on the social and emotional skills side. And in the chat function, there's a link to some of the recent work that they've done. And Annette, your work obviously is resonating because you'll be busy during the panel presentation answering questions that are already coming through the Q&A and the chat functions. So keep them coming, folks. The Diversity Institute team is hard at work coaching the panelists to be able to answer all of your questions to all participants, not just to each other. But do keep your questions coming. They show that you're really engaged. So now to the latest Skills Next paper on competency frameworks and Canada's essential skills. I'd like to welcome the report co-authors, David Gyarmati, President and CEO of the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation, and Scott Murray, President, DataAngel Policy Research, who will now present the findings of this report. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Pedro. Good morning. How's my volume? It's good?
Good. Can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. I'm gonna share my screen.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. I want to also echo a quick thank you to the Diversity Institute, Future Skills Center, and the team at the Public Policy Forum for arranging this important event and for supporting the paper. We're on a fairly tight timeline, 15 minutes, so we'll launch right in. Fortunately, Annette, you did a great job. You did cover a few of the slides, so I will kind of reiterate a couple of key points around them. And I did see a few questions come in that I could probably speak to as well through the course of our talk here. So here's a quick overview of what we're going to cover. I'm going to start with the short intro, providing the rationale for this work, why it's important, why you should care. My colleague is then going to provide you an overview of competency frameworks more generally. What are they, how are they used, and what is the keys to their successful application? I'll then come back on to discuss the Canadian context, and particularly this one important framework, Canada's Essential Skills Framework. I'll illustrate kind of where it fits in with some of the other frameworks, why it's important, and why and how it needs to be renewed. So here's the rationale for the paper and some of the key takeaways, in fact, at a very high level. Some of this has already been covered, not just today. I know you've heard a lot about it. We all know the future of work is changing at an increasingly rapid pace, not just with continued globalization, but the growing gig economy, automation, and as we painfully know all too well this year, with the global pandemic and shifts to remote work. What this inevitably brings is significant change in skills demand, something we're going to talk a lot about, and how this compares to skills supply. And it exacerbates this skills mismatch between what employers need and what the economy is and workforce is supplying. This is particularly a problem in the face of significant skills gaps that are pervasive and persistent, particularly in literacy and numeracy. And I'll reiterate some of the stats and show you some of the distributional stuff that is concerning with respect to that. And from what we know about the increasing importance and demand of digital skills, as well as the softer skills. What we absolutely need in order to move forward with this are competency frameworks that specify and provide this common understanding of what these skills are, but just as importantly, to what degree they are actually in demand in different occupations. Competency frameworks are the key to facilitating that. But if the frameworks are going to be useful, they're only as good as the extent to which they do that, and they have to be relevant and well aligned to not just workers and employers, but the actual skills that are in demand. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. What are these competency frameworks, and how can we improve them to make them more aligned and relevant? So I'm going to turn it over to Scott, and then I'll come back in a bit.
Okay, so we, in the work that we've done scanning the international literature, have worked hard to come up with a definition of competency that embodies knowledge, abilities, and attributes, and personal abilities. And the key point is that they're tools that allow one to reliably perform a job, a role, a function, a task, or a duty. They should be inclusive, generally understood to include skills, knowledge, and abilities. They should be demonstrable in the sense that they are tasks that a person could reasonably be required to do, and showing that they can be effective in an occupation or some other life role. And they should be able to perform tasks consistently, so like a high jumper, not just do it occasionally, but do it reliably. Next one, Dave. One of the things we came to realize is that competency frameworks serve a number of linked purposes, and that each of those purposes imposes a different set of statistical properties that the measures need to have to be fit for use. The list we have now is knowledge generation. So in research contexts, understanding cause and effect, what causes what to happen downstream. For the scarcely examined policy and program planning purpose, which has very high tolerances for error, for monitoring implementation of programs, for program evaluation, and for administration. And administration in the legal sense, in that you're making decisions about individuals or institutions that have benefits associated with them. Dave? The administrative uses, just to be clear about them, they are things like entry and preparation for education and training, for conferring a credential, for hiring, for promotion within an internal labor market, for selective, thoughtful layoff, and for legacy protection. And these, we've argued, have a very low tolerance for error. You don't want to be denying someone a job on weak evidence, or hiring someone without knowing what you're getting into. So this has a big impact on the tools that are used to assess the full set of competencies that go well beyond what are in common use in most firms in Canada. Next one. So the frameworks are used to profile skill demand. Canada doesn't have a very well-developed system for projecting future skill demands, but it's the skills demanded for specific jobs or by specific employers at a more general level to fill the demands of an occupation and to define educational content that's meant to equip someone with the skills that are being demanded. Then the same framework is to profile skill supply. The most demanding use is ranking applicants in a job context to identify individual skill gaps, thinking more like a continual learning of employees in a firm, and to identify sectoral and occupational skill gaps that may be changing with time. And then the third use is actually to improve the matching efficiency in education markets, who gets access to what programs at what levels, and in labor markets, who gets hired and who doesn't. And I have I cobbled together this picture. We tend to assume that occupations capture all of the variability in the skills that applicants bring to a job and the skills that employers demand. And what we know is there is a huge amount of variation on both sides, that if your assessment tools don't specify that variance and use it to find the best match in a candidate, the system is by definition going to be inefficient and do harm to both individuals and firm performance. The next one. So we have looked at the Canadian competency frameworks, including ESDC skills taxonomy and the international work. And we think there are still some things that are missing. The first is something that Janet Lane and I have worked on that specifies that there are hierarchies of skill acquisition and hierarchies of skill application, where one needs a level of skill in order to be proficient at a higher order skill. And that if you don't have those foundational levels, language, literacy, numeracy, you're not a reliable performer of that competency. We also think that there needs to be mastery levels that reflect better the underlying costs of error. The international assessments have used either 62.5 or 80% as the mastery standard. And we know that that's misrepresents the demands at the low end of the scale and the high end of the scale. So the mastery levels are averages that don't apply to anybody. We also identified the fact that the assessments that people can use for all of these uses I identified aren't up to the job, that many of them are not precise enough and so do harm to individuals and employers. We also identified the fact that there aren't very many tools that allow employers to think in a organized way about their competency needs. And so there's a need for some tools there that lead them through the process. And then if I start sprinkling fairy dust around, if people start using competency frameworks in the right way, we're going to need instructional infrastructure to support filling skill gaps in a focused way and efficient way. And we're going to need ongoing research to keep up with how the competencies are emerging. Because if you can imagine that all of the skill gaps get filled, then there will still be inequality. It'll just be linked back to different new and different things. So Dave, now I think it's back over to you.
So thanks, Scott. As Scott has alluded to, our paper does provide a fairly exhaustive review of competency frameworks. We don't have time to review, and that's not the intent to cover those. Notably, we've looked at US framework, ONET, the European framework, as well as obviously the important skills and competency taxonomy. That's a collaboration between ESDC, StatsCan, and the LMIC, Labor Market Information Council. It does provide excellent definitions and constructs for nearly 100 skills and knowledge areas. And there are plans to link it to occupations and build out a platform similar to ONET, but the paper does discuss some of the additional things that would need to be done to make it successful and applied and relevant. There's an important subset of this taxonomy, though, that we want to focus on today, and that's Canada's Essential Skills Framework. Annette has already introduced it to you. It was developed back in the 90s through extensive employer consultations, as well at the time with significant links to international assessments that we're going to talk about a little bit. The skills that are included are defined as those most commonly needed to better prepare for, get and keep a job, and adapt and succeed at work. So it has that work focus. It's made up of those core literacy skills, often referred to as the harder skills: reading, writing, document use, numeracy, as well as a few softer skills: working with others, openness to continuous learning. As a competency framework goes, it does vary in its rigor. The core literacy skills have very rich constructs. They have fairly well-developed measures, including proficiency levels, and that's in part because of their link to international assessments. The others, less so. So why do we care about this framework? Essential skills are indeed the foundation for all other skills. They are necessary for the development of technical skills and for job performance. That link has been clearly demonstrated in research that I'll talk a little bit about. And it is, in fact, the framework. It's embedded within the broader skills taxonomy in a loose way right now, but it is acknowledged as the foundation for many of the other skills. More broadly and more importantly, essential skills matter. Annette referred to some of this research, but there's a lot of correlational studies over the last 20 years, particularly in the mid to late 2000s, that utilized the international data that showed that higher levels of literacy and essential skills are associated with increased employment, earnings, and positive health and well-being outcomes. The other important reason, unfortunate reason, we care about this is because the skill gaps are fairly pervasive and persistent. We have nearly half of all Canadians that have less than level 3 skills. This was in 2012, according to the PIAC, as Annette has already said. What this figure is illustrating to you is the nature of the skills mismatch that is related to these gaps. It shows differences in the skills demand and the skills supply. So the supply is made up of what the levels that people actually have, as listed in and assessed in the PIAC. And then the gray are what skills demand. That's the great thing about the essential skills. For a large number of jobs, they have identified levels of these skills. And as you can see in gray, there's excess demand for higher skilled jobs, level 3, 4, and 5, and an oversupply of lower skilled workers at levels 2 and 3. When you kind of add up those amounts, you're looking at somewhere between a third to 45%. Now, again, we're not talking about massive gaps in literacy. Even small gaps in literacy, though, where someone is a level 2 and needs to be a level 3, can constrain employment and compromises productivity. So there's a few other points I want to make. I want to start by saying and acknowledging that the Essential Skills Framework has served us well. There has been much transformative work that has gone on over the last 20 years with industry associations, training practitioners, educators that have been serving Canadians for a long time. SRDC has been involved in studying and evaluating much of this programming in recent years. And there is substantial and convincing evidence of positive return on investment. For those that were asking about the studies associated with ROI, that can be found on our website, srdc.org. There was one in 2012 that was a large-scale randomized controlled trial. So some of the most convincing evidence. Lots of correlational studies have been going on as well. But the experimental designs are really convincing in that they show incremental positive impact and ROI from essential skills training. However, the employer investments are still not there where they need to be. I mean, they're comparatively low relative to international, so other countries, but more importantly, given the scale of the skills gaps that we know there are, employer investments in training, particularly literacy and essential skills training, are low. So what to do? This is, yeah, there's, you know, significant reasons why, and I've done full presentations on this alone, why employers aren't investing at the level. I mean, there's a complex set of answers related to the scale of investment and government support. There's issues related to, you know, in some industries, the fear of what's referred to as poaching. But none of these, in our work anyway, have been as convincing and compelling as this one thing. Although the average returns from different types of training are convincingly positive, there is uncertainty associated with those. And that uncertainty is, am I going to get it as an employer? When I look at this evidence, or when someone is presenting a training offering, do I know whether I'm going to get that or not? And the way to effectively reduce that uncertainty and make employers invest more is to contextualize those results in what they need. And there's a lot of practitioners and industry associations that are very good at that. They do that through needs analysis, where they will take that offering, they'll show them the evidence, and they'll be able to demonstrate that what we're offering is well aligned to your need. They effectively reduce that, that uncertainty, lower the risk, employers invest. In order to do that effectively, a lot of these practitioners and industry associations are having a harder time doing that when the framework and the skills are not as relevant to individuals' contexts. So we need to enhance its relevance to the changing nature of employers' demands, and we do that in a number of ways, and Annette has already talked about that. One is by this greater emphasis on some of the skills we know are increasing in importance now in terms of digital skills and problem solving and collaboration with a diversity and cultural diversity lens. We also know, in addition to enhancing its relevance, two other main points I want to make before closing is we want to maintain that strong connection, not only to international frameworks and other Canadian frameworks and work closely with the broader skills taxonomy, but as Scott has emphasized, so much good work has already been done. We want to maintain that connection with existing assessment, with existing tools, and with existing practitioner approaches. So it is very reassuring, the approach that OLIS and ESDC are taking in terms of a broader engagement to ensure that that alignment is there. And then finally, we must have this continued evidentiary link to outcomes. You wouldn't expect any different in a closing remark from a research organization, but indeed, it's critical. We want to ensure not just in coming months as this framework is evolving, but in coming years. I mean, the broader essential skills framework has been around 20 years, and many of the constructs and some of the evidence for a few of the skills still isn't even there. This is going to be a medium-term effort. It's not something that's going to happen in months. It's going to happen over coming years, and it's going to take a commitment towards doing research and evaluations to show that these are how these skills are defined, and to validate that they are indeed relevant to the outcomes of interest. With that, I will close.
Thank you very much, David and Scott. This is really powerful work, and I think you have really underscored how important it is for us to go through this renewal and to focus on those two key words around relevance and alignment. And especially in making that case and showing that value proposition to employers is a really key driver of this work. I also was quite struck by the use of instructional infrastructure by you, Scott, and maybe alongside with the ongoing research that you talked about, David, and how critical it will be for us to continue to iterate and investigate on this work, that we also need to think about how the rubber hits the road. And relevance is about usability, right? And people actually, like us, recognizing that, you know, it's the old knowledge mobilization thing. We need to get the right tools and the right people at the right time in a way that they get it. And so I really love that tools and instructional infrastructure need to go hand in hand And I think we all recognize that within skills development infrastructure, sometimes we're missing the infrastructure part. And that's something that we need to continue to build in terms of our knowledge and the knowledge mobilization. So thank you very much. That was fantastic. And now on to our panel. And we want to discuss and provide some examples of how some of these concepts are translating into real world examples and experiences. And so joining us today to have that conversation are Janet Lane. Janet Lane is report co-author and director of the Human Capital Center for Canada West Foundation, where she champions the development of a skilled and productive workforce able to fulfill the potential of the West's and by extension, Canada's economy. Janet is a subject matter expert in literacy and essential skills development and in leading programs and organizations in the literacy field. Welcome, Janet. Kyle Downie is CEO of SkillPlan, where he focuses on developing strategies to improve the skills of workers in the unionized construction industry through the building trades unions and their affiliated contractors throughout Canada. Great to see you, Kyle. We're doing great work at Future Skills and SkillPlan. And moderating today's panel is one of my partners in crime, Dr. Wendy Cukier of the Diversity Institute. Wendy is the professor of entrepreneurship and strategy, and she's also academic director of the Diversity Institute at the Ted Rogers School of Management at the Ryerson University. She's a Future Skills Center research lead, and of course, one of Canada's leading experts in disruptive technologies, innovation processes, and diversity and inclusion. Unfortunately, Shamira Madani, who was supposed to join us from the World Education Services Canada, is not going to be able to join today's panel. She is okay, just geographically liberated, at least temporarily, from a strong Wi-Fi connection. So Wendy will lead us into this panel, and after the panel, we'll have a few minutes to answer audience questions. So feel free to go ahead and enter them in the Q&A box or on Zoom. And whatever questions we don't get to, again, after this session, we will distribute the report link, also links to all the PowerPoints, and we will endeavor to make sure that all of your questions that are asked will be answered in the follow-up. So Wendy, over to you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Pedro. Thanks to the report authors. And thanks very much, Kyle, for joining us today. I am really sorry about Shamira. I'll try to insert some of the perspectives that she would bring, I think, particularly with respect to the diversity and inclusion dimensions of this discussion. So let's kick it off with just a general introduction to our panelists and how they're using competency frameworks and related tools in their practice. And Janet, I'll start with you.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. You know, competency frameworks, I got so excited about when I first started to learn about them, because I really see the potential for competency frameworks to help to remove a lot of the friction in the labor market. We have gazillions, especially now, of people that are unemployed or underemployed, and we have still got a fairly large number of jobs that are unfilled. And so the competency frameworks really help to match people with jobs and jobs with people. And I think that's their biggest benefit. So by knowing what it is that are the competencies that are required in a job, and being able to actually work with employers to delve deeply into what that job entails and to figure out what are the tasks of the job, what would it take to be able to do that job well and reliably, and then to be able to sort of put that into a framework so you can see not just what competencies are required to do it, but what level of competence is needed. That's something that's been missing in the labor market, that pinpointing the level. And so the frameworks enable employers to be really clear about what it is that they're looking for. And it gives people the opportunity to be able to say what they bring. And because competencies can be learned anywhere, it's not just through formal education. there's a way for people to bring their whole selves into their resume, their competency profile, so that they can really articulate what they can do for an employer, what they bring, what value add they will bring to the employer. And because the framework kind of, I picture it as a three-dimensional framework, and I can see where the competencies would be highlighted in a particular, for a particular job. We can also see the ones that are missing. And that helps to identify what people would need to learn in order to be qualified for a job. And as Scott pointed out, it helps to identify the people who are qualified for a job and still didn't get it. So it helps to, it helps in this equity and diversity lens as well. Like if you don't have a really good reason for not hiring somebody who's qualified, it's pretty clear. So it really helps to remove a lot of the friction. But there's another piece with this that's really important, and that is because you're working with employers to develop those frameworks, you get to ask them, what does competent look like to you? At what level of competence are you requiring? And so now employers can go to their learning providers, the training providers, the post-secondary institutions and say, you're getting me people that are partway there, but they're not all the way there. So it can really help to reduce the time to qualification, to competence, so that people are more able to get into the workforce more quickly. And that's what's really important nowadays, is to be able to move between jobs more quickly. If you can identify the gaps, whether it's in a particular competence or in a level of competence, then you can really help to remove that friction that goes with, well, I took this program, but it still didn't get me the job.
Thanks so much. And Kyle, did you want to add your perspective?
Well, absolutely. I echo, Janet, everything you said there. I think, having that consistent competency framework is crucial in program design and delivery. And, without having that, I look at it as a base. You have employers, trainers, and workers, not talking the same language. And then when you look at developing programs and tools, there's not alignment there. And so as Scott, you mentioned earlier about instructional infrastructure, I mean, it's crucial. So the first thing is to start with that competency framework that can resonate with everyone across Canada, with the industry, so people are speaking the same language. If you have that, and then you have that infrastructure in place, then you're looking at, I think, more efficient recruiting, screening, onboarding, succession planning, and then the workforce is a lot more mobile. They're able to adapt more because they're understanding their skills relative to the skills required in the job. So to me, that's absolutely crucial. And then related to that, that will help influence program design, where, as Janet mentioned, you can pinpoint, what you exactly need to work on. And then, as David said, the importance of contextualizing it to the work environment. So, having that competency framework, having something that is valid, that's heavily researched, so that, there's a strong taxonomy that people can work from and resonate with is very important. And to me, not having that, it makes us less competitive in the global market. It makes it a challenge for learners, it makes it a challenge for the educators and employers to really have a consistent system and to build off from that related to training and development. So thank you.
I think those are really important perspectives. And if I can just add in a little bit from the post-secondary institutions, I have tenure, so I can say what I want. What I would observe is very often post-secondary institutions assume that they are producing students with certain skills. And I'll give you an example. Like most students, over 90% think that they're graduating with communication skills. And yet if you ask employers, what are you looking for? They'll say only about 35% will say they think university students have communication skills. Why is that? Because they're using the term communication skills to mean very different things. A university thinks it's about writing an essay. An employer thinks about, writing memos and so on. And so I think in addition to thinking about competency frameworks, we also have to really distinguish between skills and tools. You know, writing a memo is a tool. A memo is a particular form of communications. An essay is a different one. And if we can force more common language, as Janet said, it goes a long way to reducing friction. One of my other observations is in post-secondary institutions where you have professional programs, they're much more amenable to competency frameworks because often they've had accreditation kinds of processes where people have to meet very specific standards. In other areas, there has been a lot of resistance. And I think that, you know, the work that HECO did that revealed that a high percentage of university graduates lack even basic essential skills was quite a eye-opener. So I think this has real relevance within the post-secondary sector as well, but we need people to start looking at more commonly understood models instead of looking at their curriculum and developing the competencies based on what they're teaching because that's what they want to teach. So I think that's a really important aspect of this as well. And finally, I would say, just back to the point about being able to take a more asset-based approach where we look at what people have as the starting point rather than what they lack, and then we try to fill gaps. I also think there are tremendous opportunities for innovative approaches to take university graduates, regardless of their discipline, and with a competency-focused approach, whether it's through work-integrated learning or whether it's through micro-credentials or whatever, really help people bridge those gaps. But if we don't open up to naming what the problem is and to looking at getting out of our little bubbles, I think we are not achieving what we really need to achieve. So I'm really, even in post-secondary institutions, I think this has a lot of values. I wonder, Kyle, can you talk a little bit more specifically about how you've used competency frameworks and where you've seen them effective?
Absolutely. I agree with you. Competency frameworks need to be applied in post-secondary institutions as well as the workplace. It's really about pinpointing. I look at it as a way of fast-tracking people to success and having those key targets around that. To me, that's crucial. But at SkillPlan, we've been around for close to 30 years. And in essence, our mission and mandate is to develop tools and products and provide services to create more opportunities for apprentices to get in and through their apprenticeship program and be more productive and safe on the job. And we spend a ton of time related to the competency framework around essential skills. And, there's a lot of research behind it, 25 years roughly. And, that is our base on how we kind of analyze programs, whether we're designing workplace related programs and looking at on the job competencies to paralleling it to technical training and trying to fast track people into it. But the key around that, with designing programs is, taking that framework and then doing an effective needs analysis to figure out, what are the issues, what are the targets and what are the issues relative to the learners and the workers that you'll be working with, and conducting that needs analysis to kind of figure out what are the key learning outcomes relative to the framework, and then from there contextualizing it around how you need to drive the program. So some examples that we're working on right now that we're getting a lot of traction across Canada as an example. We have a funded initiative from the Office of Literacy and Essential Skills in partnership with Fieldforce and SRDC, where we're actually designing mentorship programming in the construction workplace. And so we're working with institutional, commercial, and industrial employers across Canada. And what we've done in essence is we've conducted an analysis with over 1,000 workers right across Canada, kind of looking at from the essential skills framework, what are the issues around contextualizing this, productivity, safety, and quality, and where can mentoring play a stronger role, which is really oral communication, working with others, and thinking skills. And so what we did is we used that framework, and then we started conducting an analysis around that, and we came up with a program that we're now implementing. The nice thing around that is while we're implementing it, we're doing the needs analysis, the employers, the workers that are utilizing the program, as well as the trainers, they're kind of thinking about it from a consistent language standpoint. So again, going back to that framework, people are thinking about a consistent language around that. We're applying it into the workplace. We're testing it out. And this allows us to actually scale it a bit better, because now we're looking at, for example, one employer, we're testing it out. Then we're looking at more employers. Then we can have dialogue with, other groups across Canada that might be using the same approach, the same framework. So in a way, it helps us improve our program design and really create that infrastructure. And so right now we're talking infrastructure around good mentoring. And what's happening, it's resonating with the employers. David, I know in another presentation we can do some data analysis related to the ROI, but there's positive trends around that. And because of that, the industry right across Canada is using it. But to me, the key thing when you're contextualizing program, you got to have it, based on a common framework. You got to do the proper needs analysis, as Janet said, to pinpoint what you need to do around that. And then you got to contextualize the program relative to that, so that you're driving the learning and that the employers can relate to it, the workers can relate to it, and then you'll have stronger pickup around that. But you'll also be able to start comparing it relative to other programs. We do that with other programs as well, and we have one for post-secondary where it's same model. We are going in, we're doing an analysis of the, we're seeing the key smarts required to enter technical training from a trades perspective. And then from there, we're developing good assessments. As Scott said, that's very important. And then developing program around that to help address those gaps. So to me, that's very crucial to really contextualize that program, have it based on a strong framework that people can relate to and understand. So I hope that's a good example there.
No, I think that's so helpful. I wonder, Janet, do you want to add into that and also maybe talk a little bit about the essential skills framework specifically?
Just wanted to add around competency frameworks themselves. I did a study with one company this a few years ago now, but they implemented a competency approach to their workforce because they were having some serious health and safety incidents on the job. And the problem with ordinary credentials is that employers can assume that if you've got the credential, then you are competent. And that doesn't necessarily apply. And this company was able to improve their health and safety record astronomically by making sure that their people were actually competent on the job. And they think that other around removing the friction in the workplace around and in the labor market around having competency frameworks is that it helps to improve productivity, safety, quality, and therefore will bring down costs. So it's a win all the way across the board. Now, when you start thinking about where do essential skills fit into competency frameworks, it adds another whole dimension in terms of the hierarchy, and Scott mentioned this. So we know that we've got competence, we've got jobs, we've got levels of competence. Then we have which ones come first and which ones are more important. And it's really hard to say which ones are more important. Employers, as Annette said, they've got a study that says some employers are saying, give me the technical skills. That's what's most important. But more and more employers are saying, give me the capacity to learn, the curiosity, the willingness to be part of a team, somebody who can actually use common sense. I'll teach them the technical stuff that they need. And that's where the essential skills come in. These are the foundational skills from which you can build all others. So I love the framing about essential skills being for living, learning, and working. Because if you have good essential skills, good levels of essential skills, then life is just going to be a whole lot easier for you. You're going to be able to learn what you need to move on, and you're also going to be better at your job. So it fits everywhere, but it is kind of that foundational skill. We know that literacy, numeracy, good thinking skills from the old framework are those cognitive skills you need just to get started. But it's being able to work in teams, the being able to use computers, it's, you know, the capacity to continuously learn that are the keys to being successful in today's workplace. So these foundational skills, these essential skills, they're transferable to every job. They're required in every job to some extent nowadays. Even digital skills are required by virtually everybody, even if it's just, you know, being able to use a cell phone. So they are the very basics, but without them, you're not going to be able to move up.
I think that's such an important point, and I know at this point Shamira was going to talk a little bit about the diversity and inclusion lens, so maybe I can just step in, and I won't ask myself the question, but I'll just add some comments on why this is also so critically important to advancing diversity and inclusion. And Janet sort of pointed to some of it, but I wanted to go a bit deeper. So I think all of us are aware of the evidence that the problem with the skills gap is not just about fixing the job seekers. 40% of internationally educated engineers are underemployed. It increases to over 50% if we look at women internationally educated engineers. And while some people will say, oh, but it's because of language or it's because of something else, we also know from the research that if you have a foreign sounding last name, even if you are educated and born in Canada, you're 20% less likely to get a call back for an interview with a large corporation and 30% less likely to get called back with SMEs. And, you know, I can go on, but I think we do have to acknowledge that within our system, part of the friction is actually caused by systemic barriers, discrimination, bias, and so on. And why I'm so excited about essential skills and competency frameworks, and why we've been using this in our work for almost a decade, is because it does help level the playing field. It really does help eliminate some of these opportunities for bias, conscious or unconscious. It does force more of an emphasis on what people can do rather than what they don't have. And I can give you a couple of, you know, two of the examples that are closest to my heart really relate to some of the work around creating opportunities for newcomers and ways in which, ironically, many newcomers have the higher level skills, but their literacy is not in one of our official languages. And so in a weird way, some of them are coming back and having to develop essential skills after having developed very highly sophisticated technical skills. But where we fall down, I think, as a country, is often around, for example, language training, whether we're talking about written or oral communication. And just as the universities often assume that if they have people who have sat a certain number of hours in a program, they must therefore have skills, we know that a lot of the language training programs that we're investing a lot of money in are not actually producing results. And I saw, you know, one of the Auditor Generals said, I think half of the participants would have learned as much English if they'd gone out to work as they did sitting in classrooms for 8 months. So I also think that using competency frameworks, and especially a focus on essential skills with clearly defined outcomes and so on, also opens up huge opportunities for innovation and new approaches to, you know, workplace-based language training. Companies like Danby, for instance, have made commitments to providing on-site language training for refugees, which is fantastic. But I don't know to what extent they're actually using generally accepted measures, standards, and so on to ensure that the language training that is being conducted is producing the outcomes that are required. So I think that's one example. The other example is around digital skills. And this is one where you know, my PhD's in management science. So I'm all about the technology. I know the technology, live, breathe technology, whatever. However, there is a lot of real miscommunication around what digital skills are or are not. And there's a big difference between, you know, digital literacy, which allows you to use technology, sort of hybrid skills where you understand technology, you understand organizational practices, you can combine them, and deep technical skills like, you know, coding and at a high level. What's so interesting is we keep hearing digital skills, digital skills, digital skills, but when you start to unpack what people are actually talking about, some really interesting insights emerge. So even the OECD study that talked about digital skills, when you look at what they were including, you know, Java developers, but they were also including use of Microsoft Office and Excel. Those are really, really, really different levels of skills that are required and tools that are required to use them. And if we're not precise, you know, focusing on teaching coding from kindergarten on is not necessarily going to actually address what it is that employers are saying, at least now, what they want. So even in the digital skills area, which everyone agrees are important, the lack of clarity around what it is we really need is presenting barriers, because we know that women, some racialized people, Indigenous people, and so on, are grossly underrepresented in formal programs around computer science or engineering. But if you start to better understand what digital skills you're actually talking about and what the pathways are to developing them, suddenly you can create way more opportunities for people who are not in those deep STEM disciplines. And for me, that's hugely important because, again, some of the frictions that are being caused in the ecosystem are a function of these definitional issues. So I think it's important to recognize that there are lots of innovations. There are programs we've seen across the country where employers are taking people without a high school education in Indigenous communities, testing them to see if they have the aptitude, and then training them on exactly what they need in order to develop software applications, for example. It opens up new pathways when we stop using credentials as the proxy for skills. So I think that's, for me, part of the reason why I'm so passionate about this. I wonder, Janet, just turning to you quickly, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with other jurisdictions? I know that Scott and David sort of mentioned some of the other models that have been used, but any additional insights there?
Well, I think that one of the problems in Canada is that we think of education and training as being the jurisdiction of the individual provinces. And so, you know, there's going to be that sort of, well, does it apply across the country, right? And that's why having ESDC being so involved and ANOLA's being so involved in the essential skills framework is so important, because that is going across the country. But when you think about what goes on in other jurisdictions, they often don't have quite as much of an issue around what is a credential, what does it mean? And partly because they don't have these jurisdictional issues within their boundaries, but also because they're further ahead, much further down the road than we are in building these frameworks and using them. So for instance, just as one example, the European qualifications framework identifies for 28 countries the skills and competencies required in jobs. And so if you're a plumber in Greece and you decide you want to be a plumber in France, you can look up on this framework what different competencies might you need to have in order to qualify. And so I think that's, you know, if they can do it for 28 countries in the EU, we probably can do it for 13 provinces and territories in Canada. And the other thing is that skills are global. competencies are global. We might have different codes about how you actually wire a plug in Alberta than they do in Azerbaijan, but basically it's going to be fairly similar. And so as we get into the 21st century here in Canada and build out more and more of our own competency frameworks, we'll be able to at least start with what has been done around the world and incorporate. So for instance, when Scott and I and others were working on a project for ESDC, we advised them to, go ahead. Don't steal ONET, just take ONET. It's open source, it's open to the world. And you can incorporate ONET into our own competency frameworks here so that it's a place to start. And I think that that's the key around this international work is because skills are global, we can incorporate what others have done, and then all we have to do is tweak it to match our needs in Canada and to talk to individual local employers to add the local tweaks. Because although skills and competencies are global, there are local ways of doing things that we might need to incorporate.
I wonder if you can just build on that a bit, and I'll go to the last question, starting with you, Janet. What do you think we need to do to really ensure that competency frameworks are being more widely used among the key stakeholders? Because if we don't get engagement, if we don't get buy-in, if we don't get adoption, their words on paper. So what are some of the strategies you think we should be doing to encouraging adoption?
Well, I mean, David talked about the ROI of doing some of this work, and I think it's clear. I mean, if I can prove that your workforce is safer if you use a competency approach versus a credential approach. We've also shown that if you use a competency approach, you can train your workforce to higher standards much more quickly. I think that IBM and AT&T and huge corporations in the US are using competency frameworks to manage their teams. And so that's really catching on. So if you've got a team that can do the work of today, but that they don't have the qualifications or the competencies that are needed to do the work of tomorrow, but with using the competency framework and identifying their skill gaps, you can start training now for the workforce you need for tomorrow. So I think in Canada, the thing that we need most is a database, an open source database through which we can build these frameworks, because I talk about them being multidimensional. We can see them easily in 3 dimensions, but then you add a 4th dimension around the need for, the hierarchy of skills acquisition. And then you add another dimension, as Scott was talking about, the mastery level that is needed. Scott has this, he says, if you're digging a hole, yet it doesn't matter that much if you didn't get it quite right a lot of the time, but sometimes it really does. But if you're doing brain surgery, it matters. Like it matters now. Like you have to be a master at it. There's no leeway there, right? There's not a lot of room in that skull. So there's multiple dimensions to these competency frameworks when we start to really build them out. And the only way to do this would be to create that database, which I believe is underway right now. But we need that database to be updated real time with data that's happening in the marketplace right now. Who's hiring who, with what skills to do what job, at what level, what pay, where are the gaps? All of that needs to be in this database so that we can start to be aware of the trends. Because one thing's for sure, the trends that are happening in the workplace are happening faster than ever. Digital skills, I'm reading this week that people are thinking that we've gained 10 years in 1 year in terms of digitalization of the workforce. So we need to be knowing what are the competencies that are coming up that we need more of in people. As jobs not so much disappear, but change. What are the new skills and competencies that are people that are going to need? And we need to be able to do queries into this database on a regular basis. And without that, we're doing pen and paper work that it's going to take a whole lot longer. We don't have time. That time is of the essence right now.
I think you've identified a number of the aspects of Pedro's strategic plan for the future skills.
Oh, good.
I think that's terrific. Listen, we're almost out of time, so I wanted to give Kyle almost the last word before handing it back to Pedro. And I apologize profusely to those who joined in. We are going to end on time, but I promise you we will take all the audience questions offline and get back to you. So Kyle, last word to you.
Well, just to kind of add to what Janet was mentioning related to kind of the public embracing the competency framework. I agree, we need a database, we need strong ROI to show the proofs of putting that it works. But the other thing that I want to mention is what Annette mentioned in her presentation was the idea that you need to understand how to teach effectively a given competency framework. So when you take, for example, essential skills, you know, there's inconsistent delivery across Canada. And so if you really want the public to embrace it, you want to make sure that there's consistent delivery approach around that, and people have the skills and tools, the instructional infrastructure to be able to do it. We have a project right now funded by the Office of Literacy and Essential Skills to do that exactly, to define the key competency to be able to effectively teach the essential skills framework. And I think there needs to be a lot more professional development for practitioners across Canada to be able to do that, so that there's good program design, the employers are getting a consistent delivery model, and then you're showing consistent ROI analysis around that. So then the industry is more inclined to embrace it because there's a consistent approach. And if there's a consistent approach, that means I think there will be more people consistently looking at ways of improving the system around that. So that's just my final thought around that.
So important and so much more to talk about. One last point I wanted to make. We have to be really, really sure that the new frameworks that we're developing, especially around social and emotional skills, don't reify biases against neurodiversity. And somebody in the chat mentioned the importance of that. I just want to make sure that we recognize that whatever we do, we have to take into account persons with disabilities and the fact that differences can be strengths. So back to you, Pedro.
Thank you so much. And that's a great way to wrap up and also to continue the conversation. I was also struck by a comment about how is it that we frame this in the context of the three-legged stool that you framed earlier around life, learning, and working, Janet. And sometimes life gets in the way of learning, and life gets in the way of working, and particularly, you know, in the case of trauma, how is it that jives with the acquisition of skills, and just thinking about how we can begin to develop language and framing about how these various barriers and how these various frameworks come together, so that we understand the connectivity and we can all start to see ourselves as part of the solution, no matter where we're coming from in the ecosystem. All right, let's wrap it up there. As Wendy has said, the Diversity Institute team will be following up shortly with the report and a link to it, the PowerPoints. They will also gather up all the questions that have come through and all of your comments. Many of them have been answered already in real time in the Q&A function. Your panelists have been working hard already, so we'll share those with you as a repository and also add the ones that haven't been answered. Follow the Diversity Institute at Ryerson DI, follow Future Skills at FSC_CCF, and keep checking out our research reports. I want to thank our panelists for today's discussion. Janet, Kyle, Wendy, thank you for your great insights. And say hi to Shamira from afar. Of course, thank you as well to Annette for sharing insights from the government, and it's very important work. David and Scott for opening remarks and presenting the highlights of our latest Skills Next report. And of course, I want to thank the Diversity Institute for hosting today's event and really leading us down this path, and the Public Policy Forum for their work and their support around the Skills Next series, and in particularly the competency frameworks in Canada's Essential Skills paper. It's been my great pleasure to be here today to moderate this session. Thank you, Wendy, for the invitation. Anytime. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Thank you.